Wow, it's great to see everyone today. Good afternoon. I'm Ellen Hahn. I'm the director of UK Cares, and many of you are frequent flyers with us, and you know that we have these environmental health seminars, Zoominars during COVID. One day we will be in person again, and we are so excited today for our speaker from University of California, Davis at Davis. And before I introduce Dr. Pinkerton, I just want to put in a plug that we do have rapid response pilot funding, and it's an open enrollment. Kara will put it in the chat if you're interested. But anytime you can put a request in for rapid response pilot money, up to $10,000. It's great if you have a summary statement that requires preliminary data. And so I'm encouraging everyone to go ahead and put your pilot proposals in. We do have funding through next March, the end of next March, to use the money through the end of next March. So with all, in terms of the rules of the game, you all know that we typically keep your camera off, stay muted until it's time for a question and answer. If you have questions for Dr. Pinkerton, please put them in the chat. Thanks. So I want to introduce Kent Pinkerton. He is a professor at the University of California, Davis. He has faculty appointments in pediatrics in the School of Medicine and in the Department of Anatomy, Physiology, and Cell Biology in the School of Veterinary Medicine. He does serve as the director of the Center for Health and the Environment, the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety, and he is the deputy director of our sister center, the Environmental Health Sciences Center at the University of California, Davis. And so Dr. Pinkerton has conducted a number of studies in the San Joaquin Valley of California to better understand how airborne particles in the rural and urban settings in California contribute to lung disease. And so we are very excited to have you with us, and you can take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Ellen. I really appreciate that introduction, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to those affiliated with the University of Kentucky and your Environmental Health Science Center. I did want to acknowledge that I am part of our UC Davis Environmental Health Sciences Center that is directed by Irva Hertz-Piuchoto. It is a wonderful collaboration between this Environmental Health Science Center as well as other centers at our university. And this is my introductory slide, just that I am a member and director of the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety, and we work very closely together. It is really interesting that the University of Kentucky, you also have an agricultural farming and fisheries and forestry center as well. That is a sister center to our center here at UC Davis. But I thought today what I would like to talk about is wildfire smoke and health. We certainly have had a lot on our minds recently and over the past decade, with the importance of this as being an important contributor to air pollution in the Western United States. We really have seen that wildfires usually were in seasonal, usually during the summer, but now we have found that wildfires are occurring throughout the year. So there really is no season for wildfires. This map of California is basically showing through CAL FIRE incidences of wildfires that have occurred during the year of 2018 in the state of California. So you can see that this area is just tremendous. It goes from the north to the very bottom, the southern portion of California, in which we have had wildfires that occur. Fortunately, this year we've had some wildfires, but they have not been quite as devastating as we have seen in the past. But one of the concerns that we have, both in our Environmental Health Science Center as well as in the agricultural center, is the occupational exposure to wildfire smoke. This photo taken by Stephanie Rodriguez actually is showing workers in the field here in California who were working during a wildfire event. And if you'll notice closely, none of these workers are wearing any kind of personal protective equipment. There's no face mask. And really, there was a time where we've really improved in our understanding of the importance of PPE in occupations, especially during wildfire events, that has really changed over the last few years. But this is really an area that continues to be an area of concern for us. So what I wanted to do is really talk about some of the health effects of wildfire smoke, and these will be very logical. We have been preparing training materials for going out, and so I wanted to actually use those training materials as part of my talk today. One interesting implication that we found is the importance or the effect of wildfire smoke on reproductive health. I really call it a perfect storm, and you'll see in just a moment what I mean by that. And then talking about the benefits and limitations of respirators, and then our California emergency wildfire regulation that took effect during 2018, when we really started having a lot of these problems, and in 2019. So talking about the health effects, really, as we all are very much aware, our air is a mixture of many gases and particles. It's what allows us to survive, to live, with the abundance of these gases that are present. But in those gases, there can be what we refer to as air pollution, clearly, when harmful substances are added to the air. And these particles that we talk about could be either organic or inorganic. And certainly wildfire smoke is really one important contribution of organic-based particles that are in our air. So the interesting thing is, we all are really aware, if we see wildfire smoke, clearly it's visible. We can see it with the naked eye. If we see emissions from any kind of vehicle, automobile, or an engine, that's visible as well. But also, there are natural particles that are literally just crustal materials, dust that may be there. Also, microorganisms, as well as fungus and molds that can also be airborne and present particles that are lofted into the air and that can be easily breathed into our respiratory tract. Now, again, this is very obvious, I'm sure, to all of you, but particles that come in different sizes, and some of these particles can remain in the air for days to weeks. When we really think about particles, the initial thought was particulate matter of 10 microns or less. This is something that is usually associated in agricultural practices with dust generation and that sort of thing. But then particles that are less than 2.5 microns are referred to as PM 2.5. And this is where we see regulations that are established on a federal level for air quality that usually are associated with PM 2.5, although there are also criteria limits for larger particles as well. Perhaps one of the most critical particle sizes that we're really concerned about are particles that are 0.1 micron or less. These are referred to as ultrafine or nanoparticles. And this image on the right is from the Environmental Protection Agency, a cartoon just showing a single shaft of human hair. And the PM10 particles are shown in orange, basically across a single shaft of hair, to just see how small they are. And then if you take one PM10 particle and put PM 2.5 particles on it, again, you can see how small they are. And then you can just imagine, if we now talk about ultrafine particles, of 0.1 micron in diameter, just how tiny and how numerous these particles can be within our environment. So since we're going to talk about wildfire smoke, I think it's important to keep in mind that clearly there is particulate matter that is generated through the combustion and burning of biomass, but also associated with wildfire smoke are gases that are shown here on the left, such as carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. Dioxins are an important component that is found in wildfire smoke, as well as basically methane, oxides of nitrogen oxide, and volatile organic compounds. And again, all of these can have a potential health effect on individuals who may be breathing in these components found within wildfire smoke. So, as I was talking to, yes. Is there a question?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
We'll do that at the end. Thank you.
Okay. So Ellen was talking to me before we started about the fact that wildfire smoke from New Mexico and Arizona has actually been transported basically all the way to Kentucky. And this is one of the issues that we really have great concerns about, is wildfire smoke and the distance in which these particles can travel. So, so you don't have to be close to a wildfire event to actually feel the effects that are associated with wildfire smoke. So what I wanted to do is take a little bit of time to talk about a really tragic event that occurred in Paradise, California in November of 2018. This is referred to as the Camp Fire. This was a wildfire that took place that basically destroyed the city of Paradise, California, kind of an ironic name here for that to occur, where 85 lives were lost. But this was also an image that was taken from the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, which is 170 miles away from Paradise, where you see on the right, that's what the San Francisco skyline should look like. And on the left, that was what it looked like during the Paradise campfire event. And again, this is about 170 miles away from Paradise, where the wildfire was occurring. It was interesting during this time that we had the opportunity to meet Dr. Wilson. She was a medical resident, OBGYN, at the medical center in Sacramento. And she actually came to us at the centers, both our Environmental Health Science Center as well as our Ag Center, asking if somehow she could be involved in research, because she was really interested in environmental factors that may impact on reproduction. So she came at a time when the Paradise Fire was had not started. And so we talked to her about, you're a resident, how do you find time to be able to doing research when you're a resident in OBGYN? And she said, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And she certainly did. With this episode of the campfire, which is shown here on the right, just a satellite map to show where the campfire event was in Paradise and where the smoke, this wildfire smoke, went. And much of it, really encompassed all over California, but especially in the Bay Area. And so what she wanted to ask was the question, does exposure to elevated levels of ambient particulate matter after this campfire wildfire affect conception and or live birth weights in non-human primates that reside outdoors at the California National Primate Research Center, which is here on the campus of UC Davis. And so this is just an illustration of our monkey colony. We have approximately 3,500 monkeys. It varies from 35 to 4,000 monkeys, and about 80% of them live outdoors all the time. So this was an interesting experience to be able to look at the outdoor monkeys at the primate center during this wildfire event. I wanted to show you this line graph here. It's showing basically ambient particulate matter. These are daily averages from July of 2018 to the end of December of 2018. And what you'll see in that November period is there was basically the spike. You can see that there's particulate matter that is present that is approaching up to 200 micrograms per cubic meter of air. This was actually recorded through field units operated by the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, during this time. Now, what is interesting is this wildfire was occurring in the month of November, which is the peak of the breeding season for our monkeys. So in looking at this, basically they conceive in the fall or winter, and they deliver their babies in the spring or summer. So we actually had, we have an assay that we are using through Bill Lasley, Professor Emeritus, to look at chorionic gonadotropin, the presence of it in serum samples from these monkeys. And so in essence, this gonadotropin is present from gestational day 14 to 30. So, and then it goes away. The average gestation for a monkey is about 165 days, plus or minus 10 days. So in this little graph on the right is just to show the levels of this macaque chorionic gonadotropin as it occurs during the gestational period, that it peaks and then declines. This is also a gonadotropin that is seen in human pregnancies, but it lasts for a much longer period of time. So what we were doing is during this time of what we refer to as, I guess you could call it a perfect storm, because this was at the peak of the gestational of conception for the breeding of the monkeys during the month of November. And what we were able to do, the UC Davis closed for 2 weeks during that wildfire. We had so much particulate matter that the university, for the first time in my memory, they literally closed down the campus for 2 weeks, and which actually created some issues with our fall finals, how we were coping with those and what we were doing. But anyway, during the early December, when we actually could get people to go out to the fields, they were doing field sampling, and they just take blood samples of monkeys. They were able to collect approximately just a little over 60 blood samples. And these were from female primates that were of reproductive age in the outdoor colony. And then we were able to do this CG assay and palpation to kind of figure out, okay, do we have monkeys that are pregnant or not? So we looked at a variety of different things during this time, and actually we wanted to understand birth outcomes. So what we did here is, in looking at this, we basically found that of the 66 primates, we had basically issues where we had those that were exposed, some that were not exposed, and the fact that we actually, if they were not exposed, we had all live births. But of those 45 that were exposed that you see on this diagram, it shows that basically we had 37 live births and 8 miscarriages. Now, so what does that mean? I don't think we really need to be comparing the non-exposed and the fact that they had no they all gave delivery to live births, but it's perhaps more important to look at what's happened over the period of time. So in looking at this, these at the top, you see the breeding season is from 2009 to 2018. This is the number of monkeys that of reproductive age females and the success of the birth rate. Sorry, I think I've got some sort of automatic timer on this that's advancing. But what we see is that in essence, that live birth rates per conception is about 90%. But during the 2018, 2019, that cohort, we actually had a small but statistically significant drop in the overall birth rate. And if you looked at the exposed animals, that it was even less. And then if there was no exposure, there was 100% of live birth weights. I hope this is not too much to talk about, but just to kind of give you what's going on. So what we concluded here is that really, when we were looking at this, I'm not showing you all of the illustrations. We actually have published this in the Journal of Reproductive Toxicology that gives more details. But there was really no effect on conception rate. So that was not affected. But what was interesting is that there was this statistically significant trend towards miscarriage, or basically the loss of birth. That in looking at this in different ways, that we saw that this was statistically significant for additive model, as well as for the maternal age and parity. And on the right, this is actually showing looking at the additive component of live births and how it really dipped tremendously towards the end on the right. That was clearly below what we would have anticipated. Now, we can't really make any firm decisions about what this all meant, but I did want to show you this bar graph here, that we actually had the fortunate experience to work with people in environmental toxicology, our Department of Environmental Toxicology, who during this time of the wildfire event, they stuck a tube outside their window. They were basically in Meyer Hall on the 4th floor, and they were just sampling the air in Davis during this wildfire event. So you can see these are measurements from the 13th to the 23rd of November. And just to try to explain this a little bit better, what we're seeing is the predominance from the 13th of November. The fire started on November 8th, but from the 13th of November through basically the 20th of November, these brown and orange or brown and light green, lime green, these are all measurements of the wildfire smoke. In essence, when we think about wildfire smoke, it is about 95% carbon-based. And so what we were seeing here is, as we're looking at this, I don't know if I can actually point to this. I don't know if you're actually seeing but the brown here, this is actually fresh smoke. And then as we go along this green, light lime color, this is actually aged smoke. So you can actually see over time that we were seeing a chemical transformation of the wildfire smoke just through the transport of these materials from the site of the wildfire. And then as we get out to about the 21st of November, what we're seeing here is the prevalence of what we typically have in terms of the type of particles that are in the air, which basically consists of nitrates, sulfates, and ammonium. Now, the one thing I did want to show is this black line, and I hope you are seeing my arrow, that this black line is just showing the concentration of the particulate matter. Now in this, they were actually just looking at particulate matter that was 1 micron in diameter or smaller. So you can actually see that, we have this elevated. But what I wanted to point out to you is this dashed line, which has the triangles, these gray or silver triangles. And these are a measure of phthalates. These are plastic-based materials. So what I wanted to really emphasize here is the fact when we deal with wildfire, we're not just dealing with biomass burning, but we're actually seeing structural damage and combustion of homes, buildings, facilities, computers, all of the materials that would be in a home or in a building. Those are also contributing to the particulate matter that is present within the wildfire smoke. So we don't know what these phthalates, what influence they may have, but it is clearly evident that we're 100 miles away from paradise. We were actually able to measure these phthalates or these plastic-based materials within the ambient atmosphere here in Davis. So again, that is something that we don't have. We can't really say, oh, well, that's what caused this reduction in live birth weights, which was small but statistically significant. We really don't know what the cause may be, but is certainly worth further investigation. And I think we all know about the air quality index, the AQI, that basically the things that we're most concerned about are when the air quality index goes above 151. This is unhealthy for everyone, but keep in mind that even lower levels of the AQI can actually be unhealthy for sensitive groups. That could be children, the elderly, or those with pre-existing cardiopulmonary conditions. And when we have wildfire smoke, we were basically dealing with concentrations that are even well above 500. The Oregon fires were at 1300 AQI, and the particulate matter, which is not a direct measure of this, but we were dealing with about 200 micrograms at the peak of exposure for us here in Davis. So health effects, again, I need to just say this is what the kind of materials that we've tried to present in our centers when we go out in our outreach efforts to talk about what is going on here. So these are just simplistic diagrams that we're using, but we just wanted to get people to understand that you're at higher risk when you're working outdoors, or if you have a lung or heart disease, or even diabetes. And again, older adults, children, as well as those who may be pregnant, could be at higher risk. What are the effects? Well, these are just a few of them. And I think these are symptoms we wanted people to understand, especially workers, that if they're experiencing headache, burning eyes, running nose, coughing, phlegm, wheezing, dizziness, or fatigue, these could all be contributed to exposure to wildfire smoke or to high levels of particulate matter. So, and what can be those consequences? People could experience difficulty in breathing, bronchitis, worsening of asthma, a rapid heartbeat, chest pain, reduced lung function, heart failure, or premature death. So again, these were just things that we were trying to emphasize as we met with folks out in our area. And so we also tried to educate people about where can they find this information about the AQI. And these were just a few of the websites that they could go to or places where they can do it. Right now, I think a lot of people use Purple Air, and those actually, some people actually have them in their homes or in their neighborhoods. You can actually go online and find out all sorts of issues about your air quality within your local area, which is really, for the Western US, that has really been an important addition for what people have been doing. Now, talking about respirators, I know I'm talking basically preaching to the choir. I think all of us understand this. We've gone through COVID, we've gone through all sorts of issues where respirators are really important. And again, the idea is that these are simply filters that are trying to remove particles or impurities from the air. And it's really simply, its primary objective is reduce exposure basically to particulate matter. I'm not sure, maybe there is some protection from gases or vapors, but it's primarily for particulate matter where we're seeing that protection. So, and these are just kind of examples of where, are these going to be sufficient? And these are all ways that workers are trying to protect themselves, but these are really not adequate. Here in California, a lot of people use neckerchiefs for protection against the dust that they may be breathing, especially in agricultural practices. But what is really needed is the N95. Gives a minimal level of protection for wildfire smoke. So, and again, I realize this is very obvious to you. This is going to the extreme where these kind of filters are used. In fact, many of them are being used by the firefighters themselves, where they may use this. But then we wanted to make sure that people understand, in using respirators to clean their hands with soap and water, and making sure that they have the proper adjustment on their respirator, on their face mask when they put it on. Make sure that it goes over both the nose and under the chin, and then again, well, you can see that just these are basic, simple instructions that we wanted to give. But we actually did a survey of basically climate issues in agriculture, and talked to the workers, and we talked to the farm workers, and we talked to the farmers or the owners. And it was really interesting when we first started doing this, that no one knew what to do with a wildfire event. They just really didn't have any information. Well, that has clearly changed, not only for wildfires, but also for COVID-19, with workers being essential workers who have to be on the job. So in essence, again, just our further information that we tried to provide, making sure that that mask has a nice fit around your nose and mouth, so it has a secure seal. And so these were just basic general directions that we were providing to the people who we were talking to. And a lot of that has been we've been going out in the field to do these trainings. These are basically doing training on the back of a truck with people around us. But with COVID, we've actually had to really change our methods in working on that. And again, just these cautions. If you don't have a proper seal, then it really is not protecting you. And so, if you can't make it fit, then maybe it's the wrong size of respirator for your face. So, and this was another important part that we had to really emphasize for workers. Not that we were trying to change anyone's behavior, but respirators really only work when you can have a mustache, but your facial hair really doesn't help to create that important seal of the face mask for those workers. And again, you've probably been aware of this valve breathing resistance. I mean, some people, when they exhale, there is a valve that allows for release. This was really highly inappropriate for any COVID kind of protection. As we all know, when we went through the pandemic, you couldn't get an N95 anywhere. So, and really, I mean, people were making masks. My wife actually made masks and actually gave me Blue Shop towels to put inside in the inset. That was actually pretty good. Worked out fairly well, but everyone had to be quite innovative during the time of the initial pandemic. And again, usually for workers or people, we have always recommended single use. I guess how many people actually only use a mask for single use? I'm afraid, even though we recommend that, that's probably not really happening to any great degree. So again, I mentioned that California had the wildfire emergency regulation. This actually took place, I think it was in 2018. where, and again, it was designed for workers outdoors, and that the employer needed to provide PPE to workers if the AQI went above 151. And it was the whole regulation was, it's optional. You can do it if you can take them if you want, but they're not forced to do that. So training and instruction was something where we really wanted to include all these things that we've talked about: the health effects, what particulate matter might be able to do, the right to obtain medical treatment, and how to figure out what's the AQI in your area, and then to have a communication system where workers and employers talk together. And again, remembering the importance, but also the limitations of a respirator. So, and we really wanted to encourage, especially the people that we were working with, is that you needed to do a rescue and evacuation, or basically just get into a truck where the air quality may be better. Again, well, how do we work with people on something like this? Wildfires, they're completely uncontrolled. Harvest season is always a problem, but maybe there are some things administratively that can be done to help reduce the risk, relocating work to a location where the AQI is better, or changing schedules, or reducing the intensity of the work, or providing for additional rest periods. And so again, just a further emphasis that the personal protective equipment, face masks, must be provided to workers if the AQI is equal or greater than 151. But if it exceeds 500, no one should be out there at all working. So, and again, this is the employer should provide respirators for voluntary use and encourage them to use them. And again, this was just simply an emphasis of where air quality information can be found, because that was a really problem for the employers. They didn't know where to look. And so this was also part of the training that's happened over the last few years. And again, if you have symptoms, we really emphasize to notify your supervisor. Don't remove that respirator, stop working, move to a safe area, or get medical assistance as soon as possible if you're suffering a serious condition. Again, it can be both, not only the eye irritation and coughing, but rapid heartbeat and other conditions that can be exacerbated. So, and workers really need to have the right to have medical treatment without fear of retaliation. I don't know if I can make this work, but this is what we were using to try to emphasize what's available. And we created these guidelines, and we made them available on our website. So I think that was one of the things that we really were trying to do, is to make sure that people had access to this. But we created thousands of those guidelines. Basically for training, we actually did work so we could actually train the trainer for things that were going on, to make it, to get out the information. And again, all of our materials were laminated. It was really nice, so they could be put on the shelf and then used again and again. So, and I just wanted to acknowledge again, both the Environmental Health Sciences Center here at UC Davis, as well as the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. These are our websites and basically acknowledgement of our support. And I really do appreciate, I should have mentioned on our very first slide, I showed two people, Heather Ryden, who is the director, our program director for our Ag Center, and Teresa Andrews, who helps us with our training materials. So again, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kent. was so interesting. And I love your slides. I love when people do lay-friendly slides. That's awesome. Thank you. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to get right to it. First of all, a comment from Lindsay, and we did find the link, I hope, to a short Netflix movie on the Paradise Fires that you might want to take a look at. Hopefully we found the right link, Lindsay. If not, put it in the chat. Then we had a question from Kyra early on about, particularly about expectant families and young children. And she wanted to know what strategies that you've observed that communities use to reduce their exposure to wildfires when they're happening and even afterwards, but specific to expectant families and children, young children.
That is really a great question. One of the members of our Environmental Health Science Center is actually working with doing surveys to kind of see what the outcome may be for those individuals who were expecting or had young children at the time of some of these wildfire events. One event that took place in Santa Rosa also burned down much of that town. And so those individuals have been followed to try to understand what the potential impact is. But to get to the question, what do we do? Well, again, obviously stay indoors, basically make sure that there's adequate filtration of any air coming in to the home. If possible, if you can leave the area and go somewhere else where the AQI is much better, certainly is a reasonable idea. Maybe not always practical, and then of course wearing the face masks are important. The N95, as many of us are aware, when you have the proper fit, you can get tired after a few hours of wearing those masks because the seal is so tight, and there is a bit of resistance. So that's where that release valve may be important, not for COVID, but for other types of protection. But from our perspective, it just seems to be staying indoors, making sure the filtration is good, the air quality is reasonable, wearing face masks. If you have to go outside and be outdoors, and also if you can leave the area to a region where the air quality is better is also a reasonable idea. I'm sure if we open this up to the audience, I'm sure we'd have a dozen other ideas of how to.
And feel free, by the way, to put your camera on. This is a conversation at this point. Let me just keep going because there's a lot of questions, Kent. One has to, well, a couple of them have to do with the actual constituents that are in wildfire smoke. And one had to do with, Rick said he didn't see any mention of formaldehyde. And his concern was when you have not fully dry plant materials burning, formaldehyde may be an issue. Do you measure that? He didn't see that. Do you want to just speak to that?
Yeah, Rick, I don't know if you know Chi Zhang. She's a professor in environmental toxicology, and she was in the Meyer Hall, and she just stuck that tube out, and she was using a special monitoring system. So it was automatically measuring the chemical composition. I'm sure that there are many types of chemical compounds within smoke that she was not able to measure. I don't know about formaldehyde, but certainly if you are burning particle board, you're probably releasing tremendous amounts of formaldehyde.
Yeah, but I was wondering whether it's actually associated with the particulate, since you were talking about the particulate. Not so much. I know there's huge amounts of gaseous formaldehyde undoubtedly,
right,
formed from wildfires, but just I don't know. I was wondering whether you knew anything about that, because that would be a major health effect, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and we've also, there's just a lot of concerns about, when the combustion of woody products actually generates a fair amount of dioxins, and that may be in a gaseous form. Those could be also very hazardous and a concern for health of individuals.
Great, thank you. There is a question, again, kind of a constituent question from Jason Unrein about metals. Like if you either measure that or are metals an issue for wildfires, I guess, but particularly related to the burning structures, I think he's meaning.
Correct. Yeah. And I think the answer is yes, that clearly metals are part of the wildfire smoke. We have actually found that when we actually just look at ambient particulate matter, we are always measuring a small degree of metals in the air. They probably represent, well, I'm not sure for sure, but I would think maybe 1 to 2% by mass we're measuring metals. Now, some of those could be basically aluminum, because aluminum silicate, that's dirt, so that could be one of those things. But wildfires, they are so destructive in terms of structures, cars, tires, you just have everything that is literally consumed through the intense heat and the lofting of whatever particles are being generated through that combustion process. I don't know if if there's been much measure. I know that we didn't measure any metals in our assays for the wildfire study that we did. But again, I'm sure that they are there. It would just be interesting to know what types of metals that are present.
Thank you. Dr. Luan Lee is asking about patients with mild asthma and allergic airway conditions in regard to, he said that there's plenty of documentation about how wood smoke stimulates sensory nerves in airways and lungs, which triggers cough and dyspnea and bronchoconstriction. But he wanted to know if there's as much evidence on how wildfires impacts people like me who have mild asthma. He didn't say that, I did. Wild asthma. How wildfires would impact somebody like me that has airway issues and mild asthma.
And I think the answer is that yes, wildfires are smoke, and the particulates within that wildfire smoke is definitely something that could exacerbate or trigger symptoms that would be asthmatic-like. We know that just with wildfire smoke, for those who don't even suffer from asthma, that there is an eye, throat irritation, coughing that can be occurring. You can actually have increased amounts of phlegm that begin to occur, assuming that is stimulating a mucus production in the airways. But again, it would be interesting to look at emergency room admissions during wildfire events. I don't know the specifics for those, but certainly the physicians at the center have told us that they do seem to see an increase in the number of ER visits with people who are having respiratory problems as well as cardiovascular problems. But thanks for that question, Dr. Lee.
That's awesome. Thank you. We do have go ahead. Go ahead. Go on.
As a follow-up question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So, Dr. Pinkerton, do you know whether it's the particulate matter or it's the irritant gas in the wildfire that trigger the asthma exacerbations?
I think that it would be both. Certainly, we know that for asthma, we have probably on the order of almost 200 different forms of asthma. Some of them can be triggered by temperature, but I think a lot of them can just simply be triggered by particle deposition. We've clearly seen effects of airway reactivity that is probably stimulated by the presence of particulate matter. Most of our research has been done with secondhand smoke, where we actually look at that very closely, looking at neural stimulation and the irritation that basically in a reflex cycle actually lead to airway hyperreactivity. So, but we haven't done it specifically with wildfire smoke. Even though we have the ability to take animals out into the field, we've always found it a bit limiting to do that. What is interesting too is we had a few years ago, we had a trestle for a bridge for our train that somehow caught on fire. It was amazing how it generated incredible amounts of smoke, but the weather conditions were such that that smoke went straight up in the air, up to a level of what, maybe 2,000, 3,000 feet. And then it just passed directly over the city of Sacramento. No one even could smell the smoke because of the meteorological conditions. So again, it is interesting. Now, for those of us here in Davis, I mean, I'm not sure I totally justified the 2-week closure of the university, but I guess it was warranted. I guess if you have an AQI that's above 151, what else can you do? And that was pre-pandemic too. You know, we didn't have face masks and things like that, but yeah. But again, that when it reaches nose level, it can create all sorts of issues. Could be the particles or could be the irritant effects. I think both are playing a role.
Thank you. And thank you for excellent lectures.
Yeah, sure. So Jason Marion, a colleague from Eastern Kentucky University and a very active member of our center, asked you, are there any plans to do some longitudinal follow-up studies on the newborn primates at Campfire, or looking at newborns in the area hospitals, or is there any ongoing work there?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And the answer is yes. Dr. Lisa Miller is really spearheading all of that research. She has been involved with actually looking at young monkeys. These were basically monkeys that were born and then they lived through a wildfire event. And she's been actually tracking these monkeys. Now they're 8 or 9 years old and looking at their immune function, and actually has been seen that there continue to be persistent changes. I don't know the exact nature of that, but it's all, you know, part of cytokine, chemokine effects, where there actually appears to be a reduction in immune protection due to early life exposure to wildfire smoke.
Thank
And
you.
Lisa Miller would be the person
Yeah.
to look at to see what she has, what she's published and on that.
That's interesting. Kind of along those lines, thanks, Jason, for that question. David Oren asked about whether anyone's looked at, or whether there have been increases in general, just morbidity and mortality in California associated more generally with wildfire events, because you've had such historic air pollution issues from fires over many years. Has anyone looked at, I guess that would be hard to do, but from an epidemiology perspective, has anybody really looked at?
Yeah, I think probably from the Environmental Health Science Center here at UC Davis, as well as the one at University of Washington, they're all pursuing, you know, trying to look at that. I mean, we actually do need, you know, epidemiologists. We don't always have them in our Environmental Health Science Center, although our director is an epidemiologist. So, and she's been very much interested in encouraging looking at the long-term effects of wildfires. And that's especially with these children that were born during the time or immediately following the wildfire event. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correct, you know.
Dave, do you want any follow-up there, Dave? Or is that it?
This is just sort of an extension of Lou Yuan's question, and that, you know, let's say with the London smog that occurred in the 50s, they observed, it was, I think, well after the event. So I don't know the timeline of how quickly they had understood this, but, you know, they observed increases in death rates, et cetera, in response to that for months, immediately and for months after the events. And so I wonder if anybody's done that or is doing that kind of work. And you kind of addressed that, but I guess probably it's still to be determined in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's a really relevant question to be asking. The London smog event was really interesting because the lag time that they figured on that was about 4 days. But then we talked to other people about this, and they've asked about, well, does that really mean anything? It's kind of the question, well, were they on the edge of death anyway? And that just pushed them over the edge. And there was work that was done by, I'm trying to remember the individual, but it was the Harvard people and collaborators, that they actually were able to show that those kind of events can lead to up to 3 years of loss of life, even though people didn't die immediately. Now the lag time, we saw that really big blip, a 3-fold increase in deaths in London that happened with a lag time of about 4 days. But then they followed up with other studies to show that there is some sort of persistent risk of premature death. And I'm not sure how the epidemiologists, the biostatisticians figured it out, but they basically said that it cuts life short by 3 years. So it does have a lasting effect.
Yeah, awesome.
So even with all the education, I'm sure you have many more precautions now in California than probably most places in the US. There's still probably going to be those effects of the increased wildfire events, I would imagine.
We're predicted to have it continue to get worse through the end of the century. So the 2020 fires, I think that burned about 4% of the total land surface area for the state of California. So yeah, so it's been quite a process to deal with. And again, the word now is mitigation. How do we do forest management? How do we control this to minimize the consequences? And a drought doesn't help us at all. Well,
Right.
I think the 2020 issue was we had lots of rain, we got lots of vegetation, and then it dried out. And that's what really produced the tremendous number of wildfires. And even in 2018, as that original map that I showed, they were all up and down the state. But we're here in the Central Valley, and it's kind of like it circles us. All of those wildfires are everywhere. So
Thank you so much, Dr. Pinkerton. And thanks, everyone. We've had all this we didn't even get to all the questions, but some of the questions that have been left, we will make sure that you get them, Dr. Pinkerton. And if you want to reply to them, we definitely can get back to the person. Some of them have to do with policy change. Some of them have to do with training people after the age of COVID on using, personal protective equipment. And there was one on firefighters and, the fact that they're not very good at using their equipment and, how's that affecting the people? I mean, there's so many research questions right here in the chat. So fabulous talk. We want to thank you. We want to remind you all to please take the survey link that's in the chat. We do need your feedback. We very much appreciate you participating, and we wish everybody well. Thank you very much.